Join our family of creators. Your support means the world to us. Subscribe now to the Content Creator channel. Your support keeps us motivated and helps us bring you fresh, exciting content every week. Hit that subscribe button and be part of our journey. Right, let's talk about aluminum. Yes, aluminum. That shiny, lightweight metal you use to wrap your leftover pizza, build airplanes, and construct the very cans that hold the lukewarm beer you drink while contemplating your life choices. In 2018, the Trump administration slapped a 10% tariff on most aluminum imports. The stated goal was to punish China, but it ended up hitting America's closest ally, Canada, the hardest. Here's the kicker. Between 2017 and 2021, the value of Canadian aluminum exports to the US didn't plummet. It actually increased by over 15%. Yes, you heard that right. It went up. It's like trying to put a cat in a carrier by force. You just end up with scratches, and the cat is somehow now on top of the fridge. This whole saga is a masterclass in unintended consequences. A subject this show is, shall we say, intimately familiar with. Let's fast forward to early 2025. President Donald Trump, doubling down on his trade playbook, escalates the aluminum standoff. This time, it's not just a 10% tariff, it's 25% on Canadian aluminum, then a jaw-dropping 50%. Boost American manufacturing, cut dependency on Canadian metal, bring jobs roaring back to the US. But here's where the script flips. Instead of buckling, Canada's aluminum industry pivots and prospers. Exports to Europe, think the Netherlands, Italy. Canadian producers find eager new customers. With global aluminum prices climbing, Canadian smelters shrug off the tariffs and rake in higher revenues, grabbing a bigger slice of the world market. Meanwhile, across the border, US manufacturers like Alcoa get hammered. Their costs spike over $115 million in just the second quarter of 2025. Projects stall, factories idle. The tangled web of cross-border supply chains starts to unravel. In Ottawa, newly minted Prime Minister Mark Carney makes a strategic move. Canada drops tariffs on over $21 billion worth of American consumer goods. Orange juice, clothing, but Canada keeps the pressure on US steel, US aluminum cars. The goal? Reboot trade talks, give inflation a breather with an eye on possible interest rate cuts. The result? A classic case of unintended consequences. US tariffs meant to revive American industry end up supercharging Canada's aluminum sector and straining US businesses. It's a reminder that in today's global economy, every action triggers a cascade, and protectionism sometimes props up the very rivals it aims to hurt. So, what was the grand plan? Let's dive into the mind palace of the 45th president, a place that presumably has gold-plated everything and a persistent, low-level hum of confusion. On March 1, 2018, Donald Trump declared, "We're going to be putting tariffs on steel aluminum." With the confidence of a man who has definitely read the first paragraph of a Wikipedia article. The core idea was textbook protectionism. By making imported aluminum 10% more expensive, car manufacturers, brewers, construction firms would be incentivized to buy American. This surge in demand would breathe life back into sleepy US smelters, reopen shuttered plants, create a renaissance of well-paying blue-collar jobs. So, the tariffs were in place. The Great American Aluminum Comeback was supposed to begin. Let's look at the scoreboard, shall we? Before the tariffs, in 2017, the US produced about 741,000 metric tons of primary aluminum. Fast forward to 2021, about 880,000 metric tons. A slight bump, yes, but hardly the glorious industrial revolution we were promised. Meanwhile, the number of active US smelters did not magically multiply. One smelter restarted some of its capacity, another smelter closed. The net result was a big, fat shrug. Now, let's turn our gaze northward, to the supposedly vanquished land of maple syrup and apologies. Canada's aluminum industry is a different beast altogether. It's powered by abundant hydroelectricity. They didn't collapse, they didn't panic, they just kept on smelting. To understand how this all played out on the ground, let's imagine two aluminum smelters. Smelter Co. USA, Kentucky. Aluminord, Quebec. Before the tariffs, both sold into the US market for about $2,000 per ton. Smelter Co. USA had higher energy costs and thin margins. Aluminord, powered by cheap Canadian hydro, had healthy margins. It was a competitive but stable market. Then suddenly, a 10% tariff. A ton from Aluminord now costs an extra $200 at the border. You'd expect American buyers to choose $2,000 over $2,200. Smelter Co. USA did something predictable. It raised its price to $2,190. American buyers now choose between $2,190 and $2,200. Smelter Co. USA didn't produce extra tons, it rode the price wave and increased profits. Aluminord still ships to the US for $2,200, pays the $200 tariff, and nets the same $2,000 it had before. The loser, the American company that bought the aluminum. The announcement of tariffs on your closest ally, citing national security, is, to put it mildly, not a great look. The reaction from Canadian officials was a masterclass in polite, barely contained fury. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called the tariffs totally unacceptable and an affront to the long-standing security partnership between Canada and the United States. It was, honestly, the diplomatic equivalent of being slapped in the face by your best friend, who then claims you were about to sneeze on them. On the American side, the official line was one of tough-talking resolve. President Trump was unrepentant, tweeting that trade wars were good and easy to win. His Commerce Secretary, Wilbur Ross, famously held up a can of Campbell's soup and a can of Budweiser on television to argue that the price increases for consumers would be negligible, a statement that managed to be both condescending and wildly inaccurate. They pointed out how integrated the two economies were. Many American products relied on cross-border supply chains. In response, Canada retaliated, dollar-for-dollar tariffs including Kentucky bourbon, Wisconsin toilet paper, Florida orange juice, products chosen to hit political pressure points. The trade war was on, and it was getting messy. So who actually paid for this 10% tariff? Was it the Canadian government? Was it the Canadian aluminum companies? The answer, as you've probably guessed by now, is stunningly simple. You did. And you over there. Every American who bought a product containing aluminum paid the price. The tariff was essentially a consumption tax, hidden in the price of everyday goods. When the cost of a raw material goes up by 10%, the manufacturer of a finished product doesn't just absorb that cost. They pass it on to the next person in the chain, and that chain eventually ends with the consumer standing in a checkout line at Target. Let's go back to Wilbur Ross and his can of soup. He argued the amount of aluminum in a can was so small that the tariff's effect would be a fraction of a cent. But think about the scale. The Beer Institute calculated the tariff would cost the U.S. beer industry an additional $347 million per year. The central promise of the aluminum tariff was jobs. Good, high-paying American manufacturing jobs. The narrative was that smelters would roar back to life and assembly lines would be filled with happy workers. So, did it work? At the start of 2018, the U.S. primary aluminum industry employed about 5,000 people. After the tariffs were implemented, one smelter in Missouri did restart a production line, creating a few hundred jobs. That was the big win. But in the meantime, other downstream manufacturing sectors, the companies that actually use aluminum to make things, started to suffer. The problem is that for every one job in producing raw aluminum, there are dozens of jobs in industries that shape. Think about the workers who make car doors, window frames, beverage cans, and airplane parts. There are over 600,000 such jobs in the United States. For these industries, the tariffs weren't a shield, they were a weapon aimed directly at their bottom line. One study estimated the net loss of over 400,000 U.S. jobs. The damage from the aluminum tariffs wasn't confined to a few specific sectors, it rippled throughout the entire U.S. economy. Think of the tariff as a rock thrown into a pond. The initial splash is the immediate price increase for aluminum, but the ripples spread out and affect everything. Consider the construction industry. Window frames, roofing, electrical wiring, and structural elements for modern buildings. This squeezes profit margins or gets passed to buyers, making housing and commercial real estate more expensive. That laptop has an aluminum body. Kitchen pans, foil, bottle caps, tubes, everything uses aluminum. Every company faced a choice, absorb the higher cost or raise their prices. This contributed to a slow, creeping inflation on a whole range of everyday items. It was a hidden tax that made American families a little bit poorer every time they went to the store. The tariffs were imposed, lifted for Canada and Mexico, reimposed, then lifted again. A moving target that chilled investment. How can you sign long-term contracts if you have no idea what your material costs will be in 6 months? Perhaps most perversely, some companies were incentivized to move operations out of the United States. So, let's recap the glorious achievements of the Great Aluminum Tariff. The stated goal was to boost U.S. production and bring back American jobs. U.S. production barely increased. A few hundred smelting jobs were created. Thousands more downstream were put at risk. American consumers and businesses were handed a multi-billion-dollar bill via higher prices. The policy was supposed to punish foreign competitors, especially China. Instead, it hit our closest trading partner, Canada, the hardest. And how did Canada fare? They ended up just fine, thank you very much. The higher US market price covered the cost of the tariff. The value of Canadian aluminum exports to the US actually went up. Protectionist tariffs in a deeply interconnected global economy don't work like a 19th century textbook. You can't just build a wall around one commodity and expect everything else to remain unchanged. It was an attempt to play checkers on a chessboard. The result was getting checkmated in 3 moves. Final takeaway. Trump's tariffs did not work as planned.